What's up, everyone? It's Justus West, and I'm here with my friends at Guitar Center to check out the new Universal Audio UAFX LA-2A. I'm super stoked to be using this pedal today, as the LA-2A is obviously an iconic compressor that we all have used in one way or another. I use the UA plugin a lot, modeling in the UA mixer. I also use the standalone plugin version that they have now, since they have the awesome cloud service, but always have wanted maybe a smaller imprint that's not like a giant compressor I have to carry around, and they have finally given it to us. The LA-2A for me is great, especially on guitar, to get a nice, warmer, chunkier sound out of the instrument. I do a lot of rhythm-based parts, and when I throw the LA-2A on, it just brings so much life to my playing and also to whatever part I'm trying to compose. My background is primarily in guitar, but around like 16 or 17, I got into production. Once I moved to LA, when I was 19, I got my first placement and I was super stoked about it. And from there, my career as a producer began. Since then, I've worked with artists like John Legend, Ariana Grande, and even rappers like Roddy Ricch, adding guitar, production, all sorts of programming. So I'm usually super familiar with gear like this. And let me tell you, having an LA-2A and a pedal that I can fit in my backpack is pretty incredible. So I've never really had a compressor on my board, but immediately after plugging this pedal in, I was like, I have to put it on my board, especially for my rhythm parts, funky, chunky stuff, and even for chords. It just adds so much life and resonance to the instrument. The first knob we're going to take a look at is the peak knob, which as you turn it clockwise will increase the amount of compression on your signal. Before we talk about the next knob, I have to point out this awesome LED function. So when the pedal is enabled, the LED turns green, which means there's little to no compression happening. When you get kind of like in the middle of compression, it turns yellow to show you that there's a medium amount being applied. And when it's really heavily compressed, it turns red. I think that's so sick because a lot of times it's just a one color LED, but this one actually shows you exactly what's happening in the pedal. The next knob I want to point out is the gain knob, which is your compressed signal output knob. Turn it clockwise for more gain. I especially love using this knob to interact with the tube amp so that I can drive the tubes with my compressed signal. We also have this dandy compressor limiter switch. When it's in compressor mode, it's a 4:1 ratio. When it's in limit mode, it's a 12:1 ratio. And then, of course, we also have a mix knob, which controls the amount of dry signal that's being blended in. Fully counterclockwise is fully compressed, and I actually dig that sound a lot. But as you turn it clockwise, you're blending in more of your dry signal, where you can get a nice blend of dry to compressed ratio. And then on the back of the pedal, we have two switches. One switch changes your release speed, going from stock to fast. The other switch changes your bypass mode, where you can go from buffered to true. Now that we've gone through the settings I'm going to be using, first I'm going to play through a progression without the compressor and then play with it on so you can hear the difference. Now I'll do those same chords with the compression on. So of course, once I turned the compressor on, I feel like the chords just came to life. First, you'll hear the big volume gap because I'm pushing the gain pretty hard, and I love what it's doing to the amp. That would definitely be a super common way I would use it, as I love being able to go from maybe quieter tones to like being able to push the amp a little bit more and create some dynamics. Also, I love how the compressor kind of grabbed the chords for me. It seems like the chords just literally rang out more, and I was able to maybe use a little more finesse on my left hand with my fingers because the compressor is pulling it and it's giving like a rubber band effect, if that makes any sense. That's at least how I view it in my brain. Of course, as you saw, as I pushed into the chords more with my picking hand, the LED turned to red, showing that I was getting a good amount of compression, and that sound is golden. For the next demo, I've chosen a more pulled back sound. So for this one, we're gonna go gain right at 12 o'clock, mix right at 12 o'clock, and I lowered the peak a good amount, but where the compression is still kind of catching the guitar, this is where the LED comes into play, because when you're not sure how much compression is happening, you can reference the LED color for exactly what's happening. Let's hear this progression without compression, and then we'll hear it with. All right, let's kick it on now. So on this setting, it was a little more transparent, which I actually love for chords like that. In a band setting where, let's say it's just me, a bass player, keys, and drummer, that would be a nice good boost. I love when I can make edits on my end where the front of house engineer, whoever's mixing the entire band, can edit more musically. And so when I get into a section of the song where I want the chords to be a little more pronounced, that would be the perfect setting to kick the compressor on, where I'm not driving the amp too hard, and it wasn't a big jump in volume, but it puts me right where I want to be in the mix. In terms of compression, it was a good amount of compression where it's not overly compressed or overly rubber band gummy, but it still gave the guitar a good amount of life, where when I'm playing those chords, even when I'm doing those down and up strokes of the pick on the strings when the chord's not being played, the compressor is catching the pick and those transients, kind of smoothing out my playing overall. All right, let's dig even deeper into this pedal. We're gonna try compressing versus limiting. So first I'm gonna give you a fully dry signal, and then we're gonna go compressed, which is a 4:1 ratio. And then we're gonna switch it over to limit, which is a 12:1 ratio, so you can hear just how extreme this compressor can get. So setting wise, we got the peak almost cranked, which is a lot of compression. I also boosted the gain some because as we increase the compression, we'll need a little bit more gain to keep the same consistent signal level. And then on the mix, I went completely counterclockwise, which is all compressed signal, no dry signal. Now we're gonna turn the compression on. Now we're going to switch it over to limiting. So obviously we heard a big difference between the compression setting and the limiting setting. I love the limiting sound, especially for playing lines like that. I look up to guitar players like Corey Wong, who just have the craziest rhythm sound for single lines and even for like clean solos. If I want to take a guitar solo with no distortion, I'll put it on limiting and do like a cool rhythmic line. And the limiting helps to grab those notes and give them a little more resonance, help them ring out a bit longer. And it's also just such a classic and vintage sound. Even in the studio, if I'm trying to stack lines, it would be cool to do like a dry signal pass or a compressed signal pass and then stack on that with the limiting, just so that you can do almost like a parallel compression in the studio, just using this simple pedal. I mean, it's got the perfect footprint and the switch is actually super easy to use. You just literally tab it over. All right, the last thing that I really want to draw some attention to is the switch here on the back that changes the release speed. It's actually a really cool thing when you get into it. An opto compressor, the LA-2A is known for its smooth compression qualities, but now we also have a switch to change that release speed to make it quicker, which can actually be aiding in a lot of tones that I'm trying to build. Settings-wise, I have the peak cranked up, so we're getting good 100% compression. For the mix, I have it more weighted towards counterclockwise, which means we're getting some dry, but still more on the compressed side. And then for the gain, I have it almost cranked up, but not all the way. First, I'll play through this progression with the pedal off, and then I'll play with it with the switch set to stock, and then we'll change it to the faster release speed so you can hear all three. Now we're going to engage the pedal. Now we're going to change the release speed. It's interesting being able to have this release switch. You really have to be intentional on its use, or experimental, whichever one you swing towards. For the chords I was just playing, the first thing I noticed is that when we set it to fast, it definitely increases the aggression of the notes. As I'm plucking through the notes, instead of it kind of smoothly hanging on, it's letting it go quick and you're hearing it jump out a little bit more, which aesthetically could be pleasing in the right usage. The LA-2A is such a sought-after piece of hardware for me as a producer in my studio, but can often be out of reach because of cost, the upkeep of having a physical hardware piece, and honestly, it takes up a lot of space. But now having it in a pedal is amazing. It's absolutely incredible. Now you might be saying, oh, there's a software version, but if you're like me and you love having knobs, and I love building pedal boards and messing with signal chain and signal flow, the pedal is the perfect fit for you. First off, it's incredibly musical, and even with it not having too many knobs where you're overwhelmed, there's still so many aspects of the compression that you can change. Being able to change the ratio, being able to change the release speed, having that gain knob that can change my preamp gain to the amp, where I can drive the tubes heavier, or be able to really set these very musical settings that are great for live and studio use, make this an absolute winner in my book. And also because the footprint of the pedal is a good size. So if you want to learn more about the Universal Audio UAFX LA-2A, go to guitarcenter.com, call one of their expert gear advisors, or head to your local GC.